welcome to IT Trendsetters. Today, we are here with Jason from Arista. Or Jason, are you with Arista or are you with another company?
Yes, I'm with Arista Networks. I run a department called Awake Labs, which is the managed and professional services arm, as well as the sales engineering team on the Arista NDR side of the house.
Okay, cool. Give us a little bit about your background.
I'm 20-year veteran in the space. Been all over the US working as well as in global roles. I think some of the things that are key is I worked for multiple startup companies, at some point in Seattle during the whole .com boom. I've spent several years at KPMG doing security work, and then went from there to Foundstone and McAfee, where I did offensive security. And I left there to FireEye, became a part of Mandiant, where I worked on defensive security at some level, and then eventually stumbled my way over to Awake to help set up incident response and managed services function. And we got acquired about 2 years ago by Arista, and I've got a good happy home over here with a great team of individuals that have worked with me in the past in a lot of cases.
Nice, good, interesting. Kirk, where are we talking to you today?
Kirk is in Milwaukee today, heading back to Florida tomorrow.
Nice.
But we're in a little bit of an ice storm going on right now.
Yeah, what's the temperature there right now?
I don't think it's overly, it's not in the 30s, but it's just a little, it's ugly. It's ice storm slash, get ice all on the ground. Not a lot of snow, but just ice, which is worse because ice, no tires work well on ice.
Yeah, it's like a freeze going across the entire United States this week. So
right. So that's,
it was 38 degrees when I woke up this morning, but I'm still in short sleeves.
Okay, yeah, it gets a little warmer in the sun there in the day.
Yeah. All right, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about Arista and the whole security platform, and really understanding kind of the Arista, the unique problems they solve, I guess, in the technology stacks for security plans, and just understanding what visibility that the network piece of it with network connectivity brings into the whole picture with the EDRs and the XDRs, and what are the important flows and some of the key use cases that the network visibility allows you to play in. I know there's stories of you guys working with some of the big named forensic type companies and unique visibility that they bring you in to help augment the traditional tools like the CrowdStrikes on the edge and the Palo Altos in the middle. There's things that get missed in there, and maybe that's a good place to start. What are some of the things that the network-based detection and response, along with the managed service, can bring to the table that fill the gaps in the visibility?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think we get asked a lot about, I've got EDR, I've got XDR, like where does NDR fit? And we say there's a pretty big visibility gap. If you're only looking at logs or looking at the endpoint, and that also varies by industry. So, for example, we had recently even just a very simple retail ransomware engagement where the threat actor came through the phone system. Okay, they ended up having an exploit for the type of phone. They went in through the phone network, and via that they got onto one of the systems, dumped credentials, got onto their ESX server, and essentially knocked out the entire virtual structure. And that's one way they got in, and were able to kind of take out the entire organization without really doing a whole lot of stuff. And when we started investigating, we do also drop in endpoint to investigate, and we started looking and really didn't see a whole lot of activity. We requested logs and stuff from the company, which is kind of where your XDR and that comes in. And even if you're getting the Windows logs and firewall logs, there was like really no evidence. Okay, and this is where something like NDR plays in very key, as well as so does like understanding secure network infrastructures and how to segment and stuff like that. Because when they came in through the phones were essentially tagged to each PC, and the only thing you had really was web shell activity through the phone that hit the PC. So very small piece of forensic evidence, no logs that were tracking or anything like that. Whereas, if you had something like NDR at the switch layer down there, you can actually see the traffic going back and forth from those endpoints, all the lateral movement. And you can also see that they're basically having C2 out the phone through the web shell. So that's where something like, NDR is going to play insignificant. And then you can kind of ask yourself, like, what is the percentage of my footprint that I don't have that visibility And you'll usually see it's probably over 50% of the components on your network that you're still missing with just a EDR and XDR approach.
Okay, so how is there ways to you kind of let's think of a campus example where you're gonna have lots of switches, then you get the aggregation piece, and then you get the data center. Is there ways to strategies today start in the middle and then work your way to the edge, or what? How do you see this evolving over the next 2 years or 3 to 5 years with that more advanced visibility?
Yeah, that's the key, kind of where Arista comes into play, and is, you know, and I think why they acquired Awake, they really are kind of setting a new trend of like making it cost effective to get the visibility deep into the campus. So if you think about some of the challenges NDR has had, is you've got to drop in all these sensors everywhere, and it becomes super expensive if you've got to deploy that throughout your entire campus network. In fact, when I came here, we were trying to go through architecture discussions, and you know they were shocked that, oh wow, these sensors cost as much as all the campus network or more itself to just monitor the security. And as a business, that's probably not practical. So one of the things that Arista's done really well is they took the core components of the sensor for the NDR and built them right into the switch, which allows us to get as deep in the network, you know, as you can be on a campus. Not necessarily a full packet capture, but like those key ports and protocols that you want to watch lateral movement and stuff for staging, or, you know, access that shouldn't be permitted. You're able to watch that and then filter it back up to a top level analytic and visualize it. So that's where the campus can really excel without deploying additional equipment. And Arista's kind of set the trend for embedding that in the switch.
So basically, you're embedding it with the switch versus the first generation or the first attempt at this was like companies like Darktrace, which dedicated appliances. You now can take that and distribute it quite a bit more. Is that the kind of like the second generation onto this? Or
yeah, I think it's really kind of put a different, it's a different challenge for a lot of the NDR, I would say competitors at some level, because without being embedded in the switch, you know, they still are at that cost model where they've got to deploy virtual or some type of hardware sensor, you know, to get deep in the network and get that traffic visibility. And if you're an incident responder, one of the challenges you always have is if they did the staging or transmission of data, you know, back and forth in those deep networks, you typically would ask for logs, and they just didn't exist. You know, so you might be trying to leverage the endpoint to get that, but you know, sometimes they've destroyed or wiped out the artifacts. So endpoint's great for if you can get the archive of the data that was staged, but if they've wiped that out and they've covered their tracks really well, the only thing you have is the network traffic going across to kind of get an idea of what was moved.
So, you know, what do you do to get a good visibility for the assets that are actually on that network, as well as, you know, what they're doing? And the new strategy that's maybe more effective and inclusive than, you know, Windows machines and things that don't have supplicants.
To control the access is what you asked. Is that correct?
You know, just visibility of what's on. You know,
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, visibility is probably the first thing that I think a lot of organizations still struggle with in general. I mean, first off, you've got, you know, systems that roam different subnets and stuff like that, which, you know, maybe changing its IP and things like that, which make it difficult. And I mean, we found tracking the identity is super important. And meaning, okay, if I've got a phone or whatever it is, you know, a radial device or something like that that goes from subnet to subnet or campus to campus, you know, how do I get the identity on that and be able to know it's the same identity as it moves? And we do something that's called fingerprinting, and I think that's super important. So when you look at the network, you know, every device communicates at some certain level, and you want to be able to, just like, you know, a human would with biometrics, be able to capture that fingerprint and say, okay, we know this type of device, so you get things to parse the protocols and really kind of help you from that aspect. But then also those fingerprints, which there's a certain level of attributes you want to catch at the network level, can also tell you that it's the same device essentially moving around from place to place. And then once you know that type of device, you can sort of take the zero trust theory at some level, and you start to categorize or classify, you know, that identity into something. And then you can use that identity to segment or restrict access at a certain level. So if I don't want things, you know, accessing the R&D department, or, accessing, the core network, I can essentially apply that categorization or classification around it from a sort of a segmentation, or even tied into other integrations to keep it off of the network segments.
Well, it's kind of I guess it just kind of dawned on me then, there's really going to have to be a fundamental shift somewhat in how people are trying to secure that local area network or that campus with all the different types of devices now, because like you said, the supplicants aren't going to do much. So, and those generally run on the same devices that have like your CrowdStrikes on them, but these other devices don't run things like EDR. So you have to rely on some other way to get the visibility.
Yeah, if you look at kind of like take like hospital and education are great, or health and education type environments are great examples of probably more than 50% of the devices, and some of them are not, your standard endpoint you can drop an agent on. And I mean, you've got things like we've seen, tunnels into laundry machines that, are connected on the network. And then you've also got other third-party companies sometimes dropping in different devices with tunnels out to their company, or that are exposed on the internet, that go on your network, and you don't know what they're doing because they're essentially 100% managed by another company. However, the network can kind of see if it's doing what it's supposed to do and communicating where it's supposed to communicate. So you think of tablets, you think of, all these smart infrastructure items that the network is really good at. Are they communicating to where they're supposed to communicate, or are they doing something abnormal? And we had a great example, and I like to point to the phones, where somebody was actually exfiltrating data over the phones. They were recording the conversations and exfiltrating them. We've had fish tanks and Peloton bikes communicating outbound, from gyms and things like that you really don't see in any other way other than having something like NDR down at those tiers.
That's a great point. I just also, if you start looking at some of these devices with the QR codes, those don't generally, my understanding is that kind of bypasses your traditional security also. Is there anything you can do to help with visibility on that type of traffic, where people just pull up whatever's on that QR code right through the system?
Yeah, it's that brings a really interesting sort of challenge at some level, because if you think about the QR code and how it's accessed, so if it's a device that's for the organization, you should have some level of visibility as long as it's going across your network. Okay, but if you think about a cell phone, that's even a more difficult challenge, where the cell phone's going out through a different network entirely. So you're going to have access to the cell phone on your network, but you may not see where it's reaching out to. So even NDR can be blind to the cell networks. However, if the cell phone decided to do something back on the network, you'd be able to see that. Or if it's communicating through the wireless on your network, even the guest networks, you can see that QR code sent it to somewhere else. And you can do, even encrypted traffic analysis on that. But I think you'll see a lot of items like you think about, especially the healthcare area. They may be scanning, patients, devices, things like that constantly, but they're usually doing them on something that's on their network. You're able to quickly kind of see where those are reaching out to, and are they doing what they're supposed to, or are they trying to communicate somewhere else, or did they pull down something and then try to do something else? That's usually what you're looking at and trying to triangulate. Sure.
So if someone there's a lot of aged infrastructure out there, and let's put it that way. A lot of these people have, before COVID, they were starting to get old. Now a lot of this infrastructure might be a Cisco deployment from, 5 to 10 years ago. What would you be looking for if you were going to refresh that campus backbone? What kind of things, would you be looking for to get the visibility you're going to need, not only today, but position yourself for the future?
Yeah, I mean, you want to look at kind of all the legacy infrastructure across the board, and I would put switches, routers, other components, even servers and stuff in there. And some of the first things you're going to look for, if you take it from a security perspective, you're going to look for where legacy algorithms are implemented. Okay, and you might have encryption algorithms that are outdated, or really shouldn't be deployed anymore because they've been brute forced, or they have ways to essentially exploit vulnerabilities. So you'll see that across the board on, all those components from switches, routers, and servers. And some of them can be configured and mitigated, whereas others, the mitigation path is to upgrade them. So we're going to be looking at the asset, trying to identify what the asset is, what version it is, and then we're going to look at the communications and say, are there deprecated algorithms that are installed on these that if I was going to attack the device, I'd be looking to leverage that exposure. And then you're also looking at misconfigurations and hygiene issues in addition to.
And that's all part of this, I guess the term you guys use is automated threat hunting. Can you maybe get into that a little further and the scope of that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do in NDR, we kind of use a hybrid of automated and human threat hunting, and we've got a great group of humans here, but the technology itself, we've got models based on machine learning and AI that sort of do some level of frequency analysis with the fingerprints. So we fingerprint a technology, and then we look at, is this unique, for example? So like, is this device running unique software? So if we looked at 100 switches and saw one running something unique, we may immediately kind of look at that device as, is it misconfigured or is it got a vulnerability or something that we want to dig into? So you're looking at that, as well as you've got models that may trigger on that, and then they're going to pull in additional context. So it's going to automate sort of additional hunting on it. Okay, what is it doing? Is it reaching out to a domain? So maybe it'll automate like that first tier of an analyst and start to pull down the contextual items for you, build out the other devices it's talking to, build out where in the network it's seeing that same stuff, and really kind of get you through that first tier of, okay, I don't need to spend all this time investigating because the automated analysis has already been done so that I've got answers in front of me versus having to dig even further.
Yeah, I'm like probably I saw one of those whodunit things on TV the other day where they go back and they were able to trace people's cell phone conversations on who called who and who called when to figure out who murdered the person. Very similar to having that information, but if you don't have that data, you can't go back and look at that to figure some of that out.
Well, that's a big key. I mean, everyone. I'm going to give a really interesting example where, someone will call us for incident response and say, hey, you need to drop in your NDR equipment. And the challenge with that is if they're calling us, they've already been attacked. All right. And NDR works great from that point forward. You can think of it as this visibility, camera recording everything. But if it's not there beforehand, and this is why I would stress, when you're looking at visibility in the network, you do need endpoint, you do need logs, and you do need network. I mean, the three are all a component to really give you full visibility, because you can't put an endpoint on everything. You can't log everything in the infrastructure, and the network's going to show you everything else outside of that can't be addressed, and in a way that you're not consuming massive amounts of data storage from logging everything. So with that said, you've got this visibility, and that visibility will tell you things like, if someone downloads something, even as simple as on a Windows operating system, that Windows operating system does a check outside. And we can see that type of activity to know whether or not it's even an executable or not, even if the entire traffic's encrypted. So those are the things that I don't think people understand. The network has very good visibility, even on your normal operating systems, let alone other equipment and how it acts too.
Yeah, you play into I know one of the big the visibility that you provide that could augment. A lot of these people want to go to the intent-based networking or user-based networking, user experience-based networking. So does this solve security problems and identify potential performance issues at the same time? Or
yeah, and when you're in charge of security, I like to look at how do I enable the business securely instead of restricting them at every level. And if you start to look at watching the traffic and things like that, you're going to be able to basically clean up the hygiene at every level in the network. I mean, not just the deprecated algorithms that I mentioned, but we had examples where we see backups failing because of authentication. And how are you going to deal with a ransomware if you didn't realize your backup was failing? So you've got things like that. You've got, okay, we get triggered on things like, okay, 1 gig has been transferred over the VPN, and you can set that at whatever you want. But it's not just an exfiltration, it's also showing you, why is there certain amounts of traffic moving in directions that usually hasn't, and things like that. So you start to look at your business processes around that. You can kind of tune them. You start to look at, bad behavior. You can start to reinforce that. And you can also start to look at a lot of misconfigurations in the environment too, as well as clear text vulnerabilities that may be happening across the board too, that I don't think a lot of people are aware of.
Yeah, there's so much, right, to look at. You talked about you need the logs in all the different places, and it seems like today all the tools do a pretty good job of their own piece. Like, let's call them like very specific domains, right? Like CrowdStrike does a good job of watching Windows devices. You got other tools that do a good job of maybe blocking traffic at the application layer, but the whole thing of trying to draw the big picture together is really a challenge. So if you're someone that maybe looked at the NDR platforms that were the kind of the original leaders, the dark traces, people like that, and maybe you haven't had that on your priority list for the last couple of years, what types of things would be make someone say they should go back and look at that again? The game has kind of changed. What kind of symptoms should they have that they should reinvestigate their NDR strategy?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes people when they look at NDR, and we have to train this with new hires all the time too, is they tend to think NDR is something to detect malware and that's its number one priority. Okay, and I think that's kind of a mistake. I mean, EDR is good at that. Okay,
right,
and it'll always be better than that, but EDR doesn't give you the full picture of what's going on in the network. Okay. It also doesn't give you necessarily what I would call good intelligence too. So like NDR, when you look at it and you think about the older, when this first kicked off, they were looking at anomalies and behaviors and things like that. And that's great. But what you want is something that's going to basically take a lot of contextual traffic, run analytics and AI over the top of. If you're not using analytics and AI today, you're kind of yesterday's technology. So the network's going to look at that AI and analytics, and it's going to be able to make decisions to improve your business, improve your network, and improve your security. And it's going to give you a defense in depth that I can't tell you how many times we've been on in the EDR missed stuff. Or the EDR picked up the malware, another device got compromised, they moved over laterally with creds, and it doesn't see that because it's now legitimate use. So that lateral movement with living off the land tools, that's actually really hard for some things to pick up.
right.
That's where, your EDR is going to catch that stuff, and the C2 every single time where, or your NDR is going to catch that every single time where the EDR may not.
And living off the land seems to be the strategy of choice for a lot of these tools nowadays.
Absolutely.
So I guess the other part that kind of plays together is someone might say, well, I got an application layer firewall that should be able to detect things and figure out what applications are on my network. And then I got the end node here. Do I need that in the middle? And I think we've talked about why you do, but I was just trying to go through a use case where someone might feel like my firewall is looking at the application layers and I've got my end nodes. Obviously there's a big gap in the middle in the campus and things like that need visibility.
Yeah, and I think they're both point products that solve good point solutions. A firewall is a gateway device that its primary thing is to process traffic and allow certain connections in and out, and then you're stacking analysis on top of that. But it's always got to process traffic first, so it can't really run the heavy analytics in AI to do things. So it's excellent at what it does. It can see traffic going in and out, pending you have visibility, but it's also usually not deployed deep in the network like the campus. You're not going to deploy, firewalls all throughout the campus. In fact, in your data center, you're going to deploy it at every layer where you've got switches communicating. No, but if the switch can see that traffic going back and forth, it's going to be a much more cost-effective solution than a firewall when you get deeper in your network. A WAP per se, great at seeing, and detecting those standard, what we call OWASP type attacks, where, people are running and trying to attack the app itself, and, cross-site scripting, things like that. Great. So you might pick up that or block it through the WAP, but at some point, the WAP's not going to pick up your C2. It's not going to pick up, those random strings that we know all bypass a WAP filter and get in. But those connections are still seen over the network. You see when they connect to the device, and you see if they've come off that device lateral or back out through another channel, whereas a WAP isn't really got that analytic intelligence to figure that out.
Now, there's a trend in the industry where people are, for the last, I say a couple of years before the pandemic, through the pandemic, everybody had a cloud first strategy. Now it's like, oh, that's not the best strategy always. And then you're starting to see the hybrid data centers open up again now. What kind of role does a tool like this play in the visibility, maybe the east-west traffic in that data center? Should that be designed in? And can that do that more effective than maybe putting the firewalls in the middle of traffic?
Yeah, just like the campus, how we get deeper. If you think about, it's going to be a fraction of the cost to put in what we call our DMF fabric, which the DMF essentially consolidates all traffic, deduplicates it, and gives you visibility. So if you think about you're setting up 30 different racks, okay, you can put all the traffic back into the DMF, deduplicate it, and then put it to an analytic versus putting in probably 30, 40 firewalls that will cost you, 10x the cost. And the really cool thing about a data center that's very different and where NDR really shines, how many endpoints are really in there? You're not dropping an EDR into that environment hardly at all, maybe a few systems. Now, with that said, there's a few connections. They're purpose-built. They're only doing certain things that should be supporting the data center. And what's really good about NDR is you can look at every one of those connections. You can categorize them so you can get really detailed, and you can say, look at this, it could be supply chain if it's not one of these addresses talking to my device. So you think about how SolarWinds came in and it went to a different DNS. Well, you can basically set up an NDR analytic to say, if anything outside of this small structure communicates in any other direction than I want, alarm me. So that would pick up those supply chain attacks, even on your own equipment in the environment.
Okay, that's much more structured traffic in those areas.
Absolutely.
I guess the other payment off of that is you hear a lot of talk about the zero trust architectures, and I guess how does this play into the zero trust architecture?
Yeah, I mean, I'm usually scared with words like zero trust.
I know that's a big name.
Yeah, I mean, there's pieces of everything. Zero trust is not a simple solution. Let's just say that. And I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, like when you think about its visibility and observability of network traffic, and then you think about how do I categorize and classify it, and then how do I monitor it? Those are all components of zero trust. Mm-hmm. So, if we've got full visibility of all the assets on the network because we're bringing that into a centralized component, deduplicating it, and then looking at it, we've now got a little bit of good grasp. Now, if I can take the analytic and kind of group and classify things, I can decide what's important and not important, which is part of the zero trust item. And then now we've got, full monitoring over the top of that. And we've also got automated monitoring over the top of that you can do. So you can really kind of take that component from a network level and really kind of shore it up pretty strong from a zero trust. Now, that's not everything in zero trust, but it's a component of it that does a great job at it. And then you can look at segmentation strategies, blocking and things like that, access control through integrations and other tools with the NDR.
Okay, great. And then question on kind of the SOC or managed SOC world. I know there's a lot of different ways to approach that. You can do it in-house, you can outsource it, you can have a MSSP, you can have a XDR guy, data lake guy. Where do you see all that headed as far as managing of these networks, and what components are you going to need long term?
Yeah, no, this is so as you know, I run a managed service function, and
right.
I've got some of the best threat hunters who come from the incident response. But I wouldn't say we're needed in every case. There are people that have 100 people in a SOC that they're searching through a data lake, and all they want is the data, and they're digging into it. And that's great if you can afford to do that as a company and have your own team that's doing that. You're probably not going to necessarily leverage a managed service in most cases. Where I do see certain things are kind of key is if you think about the traditional MSSP, it's someone monitoring 10 technologies, and they're expected to be good at EDR, understanding logs, working on the WAF, working on the firewall, all that. And we've kind of pushed our customers away from that at some level and say, look, we're network and network threat hunting experts. So if you want somebody who's really good at the network, who comes from forensics and threat hunting background, go Google how many things are out there. There's not a whole lot. And we are very specialized in expertise. We spend 100% of our time just looking at network stuff. And then we have a field team on the ground for IR that helps us, keep in reality with the endpoint world. And I think you'll see our approach is to really help out groups with expertise. And we think just like CrowdStrike is good at the EDR and monitoring the EDR, we believe there should be kind of a parallel on the network side where people have a more in-depth network skill than, what you're going to find in a traditional, monitoring, or even probably in your own org. And we do managed services for some big companies. And I can tell you, we've stopped attacks, where we've seen compromise over the network, 20 systems in like 20 minutes. And then we've got them contained within a couple hours and kick the actors out. And that's the power of somebody who just constantly specializes in looking at the network that they're able to provide. So I think that's a benefit.
And I would say you have a tougher job just because the inputs are a lot more diverse than they would be on like a Windows machine. You have unlimited amount of inputs.
It was a challenge, honestly, when we first came to, you've got these parallels to logs on the network, like a log ID is essentially similar to what we call an opnum going across the network. But understanding that and kind of digging in and then knowing the nuances, like you'll really understand how an endpoint communicates by watching it over the network. Like the example I mentioned of if you download an executable on a Microsoft OS, it checks AV up in Microsoft by default. And most people probably don't know that. Maybe they see it at the process level, but they don't realize it's actually making a call out to Microsoft. When you upload something to a file share, it's going to certain URLs on a file share, and some of those can be good and bad and stuff like that. And we're pretty well versed in that if you don't have that knowledge, you're going to spend a lot of excess time researching it.
Okay, now that's great insight that the network piece can pull together that maybe gets overlooked sometimes. Because the easy button, I think, was people think most of the attacks are on the end node, so we got good visibility there, so we're in pretty good shape, I guess. But then there's a lot of things you're not necessarily in good shape on.
Yeah, I think the key thing is, you want to defense in depth, EDR, logs, NDR, and I think you'll see the EDR and logs are probably picking up about 50%. The network's picking up the other 50% you're probably not watching today. And that's the number one takeaway I would tell you. You think you've got it covered, but just do the calculation of what doesn't have logs and endpoint, and you're going to see it's a large amount of items.
Like you said, even where the endpoint's going sometimes or what it's doing, you don't get a good visibility into that easily on a scale. But with all the other endpoints, what's going on? So no, that's good. Any other comments or things that I may have missed, or I think we have a good smattering of information here. I have one on the threat hunting before I go on that. If you do find something, do you actually work with the people to tune that sometimes in their environment, like ad sims or playbooks or replays, and is that part of the service?
Yeah, we do a couple of things. We usually provide detailed directions. If there is an actual compromise, and I mean, I'll give you a couple examples. We deployed in a campus network. We actually found somebody was doing espionage, and we informed them. And then a week later in the same network, they got hit with an actor coming in that was trying to encrypt them. They actually had us come in and do the response. So we came in. We will drop EDR in and do the response in addition, and then we will help them with hardening their Active Directory environments and stuff. So we do full remediation at that level if needed for customers.
Is the EDR, do you use yours or do you use somebody else's?
We do use a third party. We usually try to stick with one or two different vendors on it. And the technology itself integrates with the major players. And again, EDR is a necessary component. As well as, I would say logs and NDR and everything, as I mentioned. EDR gives you good containment capability, so you want visibility, you want containment, and then, you're going to need resources to help shore things up and minimize impact.
All right, great.
What's your
I appreciate that.
perspective on
Very educational.
What's your perspective on ChatGPT?
I use it daily, and my take is if you're not using AI in your daily job, you're probably slower than people who use AI in their jobs. It's a huge time. It helps you definitely do things faster, and you just got to be careful sometimes with, is it getting you accurate data? So for certain purposes, it's excellent. And I think the real thing people should be asking as the next step is, how well are you controlling the Chat GPT to give you the right answers?
Exactly.
I saw one of the financial services companies today came out and said that they blocked it for all their employees from using. So do you feel there's a big risk of people putting in proprietary information into ChatGPT-3? Is there a risk there?
There's absolutely a risk. I mean, think about it. As a developer, ChatGPT can speed you up significantly. So are you pasting your company's code into ChatGPT and having it refine it for you? Could be an issue. If I'm writing a blog or an article or something inside, it can probably write it better than I can. Am I pasting it in ChatGPT? So as much as it's an advantage, you do have a very big potential for data on it if you're not really, paying attention to that. So I can understand why someone would block it too. I think as a professional, it's a huge advantage to being more efficient, though.
It's scary how much more efficient you can be writing an email. You always have to go through that. Okay, let me organize my thoughts and then make it not too verbose.
Yep. As a manager, if you want to soften up your statements, ChatGPT works good at that.
Exactly. Very professional.
For a lot of the MSSPs out there, do you think there's going to be a huge opportunity once the API is opened to create your own little ChatGPT environments?
Yeah, I think you're also starting to see derivatives of it being built now, and I think you'll see more of that. I would bet, one of the trends we're going to see over the next years is that, those who use that type of AI will move forward, and those who don't are going to be left behind, because it really is just an efficiency of time aspect, where it might take you 40 hours to do something, you can do it in 2 or 3 if you're leveraging that type of technology. So to me, I do think you're going to see more people creating different versions of it, and you're going to see it over time start to get incorporated into different processes in the business, both security and regular components.
Awesome.
It's kind of like the spreadsheet, what the spreadsheet was to math. I guess this is the, covering a topic, really getting started on a topic.
Yeah, someone said to me there was the steam engine, and then there was ChatGPT 3.
Exactly, pretty much.
Yeah, I don't use Google that much anymore, which is probably should be careful about that actually on here. I mean, Google's great for certain things and historical stuff, but the ChatGPT is pretty good at certain items, being able to ask it versus a regular search. So I think you'll see even places like Google will probably start to change the way they work from an interface and answering things, or have some component that offsets the same way too, is my take.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes Bing a threat.
Yeah, don't play that Google statement, man. I'll be in trouble.
Oh, okay, yeah, it's a big customer, so I'll stay away from that one, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it does look like Microsoft is going to get out ahead of them on this whole thing. I don't know.
I think Bing's doing pretty well right now with some of their stuff. So I do think you'll see that stuff integrated into a lot of items. I mean, it sounds like, Kirk, you use it, yeah?
Oh yeah, definitely. It saves I got to remind myself to use it. Sometimes I use it and I get done so fast I forget I used it, and then I go back the old way sometimes.
It's phenomenal at rewriting stuff, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
Oh, it's great.
Asking about attack surface management and all that stuff, and what are the pros and cons versus like vulnerability management. And
yeah, I probably should be careful about this, but it's pretty good for competitive analysis too.
Exactly. Yep. No, it can. But also will make, like if you have 2 founders came from one company and your third founder didn't go there, like come from Cisco, it'll assume that third guy came from Cisco if it reads enough that, the other 2 guys came from Cisco.
Yeah, I mean, I actually asked it about NDR and our stuff. And one of the things that you can kind of just look at, okay, if people are using Chat GPT in that too, it also changes kind of the marketing and the program marketing and that whole SEO. Okay, well, what did you do to make sure you come up on the Chat GPT and come up with the right answer? So I think companies need to be looking at it
Yep.
that way too, to make sure they're actually pulling it into their marketing strategies.
Yep. It's definitely a game changer. You're going to be out of date if you don't leverage it. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Cost wise.
Great
Awesome.
question.
Well, Jason, I appreciate you being on IT Trendsetters.
Yeah, thanks,
Absolutely.
Jason.
Hopefully using Chat GPT keeps me on here.